Welcome to our second Youngstown-lived reading, celebrating writers who live or have lived in Youngstown. The Youngstown literary tradition is deep and strong. And my name is Karen Schubert, and I'm the director of Lit Youngstown, a nonprofit building on this literary tradition in Northeast Ohio with programs for writers, readers, and those who love a good story. Thank you to Elizabeth's Bookshop and Writing Center for creating a virtual bookshelf for tonight's reading. Founded by Rachel E. Cargill, Elizabeth's Bookshop and Writing Center is a bookstore in Akron, Ohio, with a catalog that highlights, amplifies, and celebrates the work of QT BIPOC writers who are often excluded from traditional, cultural, social, and academic canons. A percentage of Elizabeth's proceeds go to support the work of the Loveland Foundation, providing free therapy for Black women, girls, and gender nonconforming individuals. I'm so pleased to welcome our two writers tonight, and also very pleased to welcome tonight's moderator, Cassandra Lawton, whose pen name is Rosemary. Cassandra graduated with a Master of Fine Arts degree from the NEOMFA program, specializing in fiction. Her fiction, nonfiction, and poetry have appeared in several anthologies and literary magazines, including Straylight Magazine, Anomaly, and Laurel Review. Welcome.
Thank you, Karen. And it's so nice to see you both too. And so I'm going to start by introducing Sarah K. Steffens. It's nice to finally meet you too and see you over Zoom.
Nice to meet you too.
I'm really excited to kind of hear you read from your different pieces. And so Sarah is a developmental psychologist and teaching professor at Penn State University, a graduate of YSU. Sarah is the author of 6 psychological thrillers, including It Was Always You and The Killing Kind. When she's not writing or teaching, she volunteers as a firefighter with the ALPHA Fire Company. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yes, thank you so much for having me come to participate in this. I love my experience at Youngstown State, and I just had such a wonderful experience as an undergrad and growing up in Youngstown. So I'm really thrilled to be connecting back to YSU. And then, is this something where, would you like me to start with my reading or, yep, so should we go into that? Sounds great. So what I was thinking about doing this when I was first invited to participate is kind of thinking about my experiences at Youngstown State. I was a psychology major, and then I did English as my minor. So it was a wonderful experience working with a lot of different faculty. And I thought I might start with a reading from my newest psychological thriller, The Killing Kind. And I always joke that the way that it works is that when I'm in my classes, we focus on developmental psychology and keeping and growing people to be healthy adults. Essentially, it's all really positive material. And then my books are all about people behaving badly. So it's kind of interesting to go from my work where I'm doing a lot of focus on how can we grow children to be healthy and well-adjusted adults. And then I'm like, let me write about what happens when it all goes wrong. And I just have a lot of fun with it. When I'm writing my books, I often have an outline. And then as I'm writing it, I'm like, well, what if we did this? What if we just let it go crazy, like off the rails? So I love that. And then editing comes into play and we have to pull back some of it. But what I wanted to do was to start with The Killing Kind. It's my newest psychological thriller. And It focuses on a psychology professor, because write what you know to a certain extent, but definitely the character's name is Trina or Katrina, and definitely her life is very different from mine. Mine is a nice, quiet life. And I'm going to open with actually the opening scene because it made me, when I was writing it, I was thinking about the Youngstown area, and I was thinking a lot about all the hotels and the kind of suburban sprawl that we have in the Boardman, Poland area. And I was thinking about these different hotels and all the different kind of events that happen there. So you can kind of picture yourself on like Route 224 as we're doing this. Okay, so chapter 1. She spotted him across the crowded room and knew instantly he was her mark for the night. The music vibrated through her body and mixed with the top-shelf gin they were serving to create a special kind of alchemy. Under the right circumstances, it translated into what for Trina served as courage. Under the wrong circumstances, it ruined lives. Mainly hers, but others people too. Tonight, she wasn't sure yet which it would be. He was different from her type. Trina usually liked them with a whiff of post-football fraternity brother, thick and meaty like a lamb chop. But this guy was long and lean, with a half-finished tattoo sleeve of roses and skulls on his right forearm and a glittery pink bow tie. In the dark of the banquet hall, his attempt at a beard read as a meager, scrubby patch under his chin. The DJ queued up Dancing Queen by ABBA, and Trina was almost swept into a swirl of pink organza as the bridesmaids swarmed the dance floor and made a circle around the bride. He stayed at the bar, sipping on what looked like a vodka tonic, but turned to watch the gaggle of women link hands and belt out the chorus. Trina pulled at the tight fabric of her dress and smoothed it over her thighs. It was a royal blue that brought out the rich black of her hair, which she'd had blown out yesterday. She knew she looked good tonight. Under the kaleidoscope lights of the dance floor, maybe she could even pass for vibrant. That's why she loved weddings, mood lighting and free booze and happy dreams rattling around everyone's heads, if only for the day. Hard living was forgiven with a temporary suspension of reality. She finished her drink, set it on a nearby table, and made her way over to the bar. As she got closer, she realized he was younger than she'd originally thought, probably 10 years younger than her, maybe 15. Not that it mattered. She'd never see him after tonight. She took the spot next to him, shifting her hip over to his side and purposefully making contact with his leg. Trina noticed he'd sweat through the armpits of his plaid shirt. Vodka tonic. She leaned over the bar, pushing her cleavage together, and flipped out a hand to catch the bartender's attention. Bride or groom, he asked. She'd been expecting some kind of lame opener, and he did not disappoint. Trina snatched the drink that appeared in front of her, turned around and leaned her elbows against the bar. In her head, she tossed a coin. Groom, she told him, old family friend. And you? He smiled, and Trina couldn't deny how handsome he was, despite the hipster vibe. Bride, childhood friend. Trina took another sip. She hated vodka, would have preferred gin, but at this point in the evening depended on some basic mirroring. Enjoying your drink? She asked. I am now. Ugh, she thought. She took another sip. It was easy to get him dancing. She moved to the music, grinding against his leg while the DJ played today's top hits. His hands left wet smears on the fabric of her dress, and when he nuzzled up to her ear and asked if she wanted to get out of there, the sweat from his face left drafts of moisture on her cheek. She still told him yes. Trina noticed some people, including a few 20-somethings, with primary colored cocktail dresses, casting nasty glances their way as they stumbled off the dance floor and out the door of the banquet hall. As he reached for her hand, telling her in sloppy half-speech that he'd rented a suite upstairs and she should really try these little special cookies they had in the minibar, she heard cheers echo out from the wedding guests. She pulled back on his arm, leaning into the doorway to see what was happening and catching the bride and groom as they delicately fed each other cake. Trina smiled. She always liked that part. He pulled her back in towards the hallway and kissed her hard. Trina had to fight not to recoil from his lips, which were surprisingly blubbery. She caught one of the dress brigade staring back at her from across the hall, judgment clear in her sunken eyes. For one moment, Trina paused and considered what she was doing. She could leave, just go and call an Uber and forget any of this ever happened. No one knew she was here. She didn't even know this guy's name, and he didn't know hers. He'd barely remember her in the morning. But she did go with them. She spent the night with them. The night that would cleave her life into a beginning and an end, before the murder and after. That sets the stage for The Killing Kind. And it was a lot of fun kind of thinking about this, psychology professor who's done all this stuff in her career, and then her life is kind of spiraling out of control. She's going to random weddings to pick up men, and then there's a murder, and then what happens from there? So, it was all of my books are a great deal of fun to write. I hope they're also a lot of fun for readers to read too. It's funny, I know you had mentioned in my biography, I'm also a firefighter with Alpha Fire Company as a volunteer. And ever since I joined the fire company, all of my books have fires in them. It's just like, I don't know why, I just can't stop writing about fire. And the current book I'm working on, that I'm hoping to have out in the fall, is called, get this, The Girl in the Fire. So fires and explosions. And when you're a firefighter, you go through a lot of training, a lot of coursework about fire behavior and stuff. I'm like, oh, I could put this in the book. So there you go. Now, I also had It Was Always You. Now, this is my love letter of a book to Youngstown State. It's actually set on campus, and a lot of terrible things happen in the book, but nothing is terrible about Youngstown State. I love it so much. But I thought it was just really a nice way, as I was writing it, I was kind of walking through my memories of being an undergraduate and being on campus, and DeBartolo Hall is in there, and Mogg Library is in there, and all these touchstones from campus. So I don't know if we have time for me to read a little bit from there too. Yeah, should I? Okay. So let's see here. I think I'm going to read from this little bit here where she's in her office. And again, you're going to get a sense. This is told from the first person. What we see here is the main character just talking about her boyfriend, Justin. At the beginning of the book, there's a scene where Justin dies in a car accident. And then we do a bit of a flashback, and we're talking about what led up to that. And again, all sorts of chaos and twisty things ensue. But I like this one because it has a couple of touchstones to my time at Youngstown State. And there's also, you're going to pick up a little reference to I call her my work wife. She's my colleague here at Penn State. And we're in the midst of finals week right now at Penn State, which I imagine YSU is close to it, if not in finals as well. And it's a time that's great stress for students and for faculty. And my friend Jen and I will often be like, cue the music, here we go. It's just getting crazy. And so there's a reference to that in the character of Maria. I think about my friend Jen when I'm talking about that. So let me read this to you. Okay, so I hold office hours at 8 a.m. twice a week. That's early office hours, by the way. I don't know why I made it that early in the book. Oh, here's why. It's a trick I happened upon early on in my career. I'm still early on, I suppose. So I guess I mean earlier. To schedule office hours at the undergraduate equivalent of the crack of dawn. It helps weed out ambivalent students from showing up just to fish for extra points in the last exam. Typically, I spend the hour reading the news headlines and checking my Google alerts for updates to developmental topics. The world is obsessed with growing our children healthier, smarter, and prettier. But today I can't help myself. I have to post something about last night. I log into my Twitter account and scan the most recent trends before opening up a new tweet box. That should be something, shouldn't it? Tweet box. Despite my fight with Annie, I'm in a good mood this morning. Today at 6:12 a.m., as he was handing me a cup of tea in bed, Justin said he loved me. I almost dropped my cup. Sure, I deflected the whole question of, did he say he loves you when Annie asked me last night? But it burned me all the same. One thought kept skittering through my head. Why was I talking about love when he wasn't? To be honest, it felt a little sickening. Growing up a ward of the state, love can be a touchy subject. But then I wake up today and Justin is standing there looking at me with this expression on his face. And before I'm even fully with it, he says, I love you. Plain and simple. And then he kissed me. And so I found myself saying it back to him against his lips. And then, well, afterwards, I had to rush into work this morning. At Not That Kind of Doctor, that's her Twitter handle. We get that a lot as psychologists. I'm not a real doctor. Good morning, Tweeties. Have a lovely day. As I click post, a thought shimmers in my periphery. I log on to Facebook. I don't use this account nearly as often, mainly because I prefer the snappiness of Twitter or posting pictures of my baking exploits or comments on academic life. That's what I post usually. But Twitter doesn't have something Facebook does. I click on relationship status and then stop. You're being impulsive, I tell myself. You shouldn't be doing this. I haven't done any online searching yet because back when things got bad, Annie made me promise not to fall down the same rabbit holes. She even made me sign a contract she drafted up. When she showed it to me, I tried to crack something witty, but ended up with something like, hey, who's the psychologist here? Well, Annie gave me a watery frown and said I should take it seriously. And I have, at least until now. I type his name into the field and wait for his profile to pop up. The contract had 3 items on it, by the way. I will not Google the men I am dating. I will not follow or stalk the men I am dating. I will not use social media for anything dating related. God, it is embarrassing to list those out. But like I've said again and again, and Annie can confirm for me, I'm better now. I look at the field and see several Justins appear, but no Justin McBride that is my Justin McBride. And just like that, a hard little seed settles inside my stomach. My boyfriend isn't on Facebook. My boyfriend, who's just said he loves me. I sound like a teenager, don't I? Instinctively, I peer up from my screen and walk over to my office door just to make sure that I don't have any students waiting for me. The hallway is empty except for my colleague Maria, letting herself into her office 2 doors down. Cue the music, she says, twirling her finger the way she always does as finals week lurches near. And she's right. Things get a little wild with students manifesting all manner of ailments and excuses, and requests to meet with the dean about your refusal to accept a late paper. But today I'm not game like I usually am and only manage a brief smile before rushing back to my desk and logging back over to Twitter. Then Instagram. And finally, I'm not proud to admit this. Even though I don't have an account, I create one for Snapchat just to search for his name. No Justin McBride anywhere online. The disappointment I feel shouldn't be a surprise to me, not if I'm being honest with myself. And it isn't a surprise, not really. What it is, as I carry it through my day, is something else, potent and raw, familiar. The next day, I force myself to read the research article on institutional privation I'm assigned to my students for a maddening 20 minutes. And all the while, compartments of my brain are ticking away at full speed. I have to read sentences 2 or 3 times before they make any sense. Because every time he loves me rolls across my serotonin receptors, but why comes along to dampen any effect it might have. I spent the bulk of yesterday prepping exams and grading while Justin was busy with his own research. I wouldn't have minded us seeing each other in the evening, but Justin said he had a lot of work to catch up on, and instead, if we can meet for dinner tonight, which is fine, totally fine. Except I keep repeating to myself, how fine is it? And pause it there. So it's a little bit of academic life, a little bit of leading up to this relationship that's going to go haywire. And like I said, It's a kind of a love letter to Youngstown State campus and all my great memories there. So I thank you all for letting me read a little bit from my work. It was a joy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. That was so much fun to like hear each part and to see how like the difference in like the tone and voice and stuff were too. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Couri, and then kind of give you a chance to read as well. So Couri Johnson is a graduate of the NEOMFA and holds a PhD in creative writing from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. She is the author of fabulous fiction that blends the industrial world with fairy tale motifs. Her short story collection, I'll Tell You a Love Story, is available through Bridge 8 Press, and her novel, The Girl Who, through Gateway Press. Her forthcoming collection, Feral Tales, will be available this summer through Aqueduct Press. For more information about her work, you can visit her website, courijohnson.com. Thanks so much, Couri.
Hey everybody. It's me, Couri Johnson. I'm happy to be here. Happy to be back in Youngstown, where I grew up after about almost a decade. Thank you so much, Karen, for putting this together and having me here tonight. And thank you, Sarah, for that reading. It was wonderful. I discovered early in my career as a graduate student that teaching at 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. is the move, because you're bound to get less students, and the ones that do stick around are usually a little bit more highly motivated. I am outside because my cats rule the interior of my studio apartment, and if I were in there, it would be chaos. They're currently staring at me malevolently as we speak. Hopefully the neighborhood will cooperate and not make too much noise. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, fantastic. I'm going to be reading from my novel and stories, The Girl Who. I would show you the cover, but it's already beat up and sticky, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be reading a story in particular called The Girl Who Tends the Paper Forest. That's online. Can't remember the name of the place that published it now, but you can find that at my website, www.courijohnson.com. That's COURIJOHNSON.com. Mr. Barzak taught me that. All right, so let's get going. He finds her on the side of the road, and it's raining. This is how it begins for them. This is how it always begins, with the heavens splitting open their tear ducts, with the atmosphere mourning. Here's a story that is like many stories. A man finds a deep hole that leads to another world, a world of ogres and dragons and castles ripe with treasure. He lets himself fall through the hole, and there, in one of those ripe castles, is a ripe girl, waiting for something she doesn't know the shape of. And he tells her that he wants the castle, he wants the treasure, and he wants her. And she tells him, well, sure, but it all belongs to her brother, the ogre Ivan. But the man doesn't care and cuts Ivan's head off the instant he comes home. Then he takes it all for himself, the castle, the treasure, and because she has nowhere else to go and no one else in the world, and because she knows no better, she lets herself be taken too. This girl is in a copse of trees, a small snatch of them left standing back a ways from the new highway. It is the rain that drives them together. Even as the rain is the skies weeping over their inevitable collision. The sky, dribbling tears, knowing before they know all that will happen from having to have watched it again and again from its great distance. So the rain pours, and it pulls her out from under the canopy of leaves into the open, because she so greatly needs the feeling of touch, even if the touch is something damp and cold and stinging. And he sees her, there in the downpour, with her arms open towards the sky and soaking wet. And misinterpreting her need, he slows to a stop to offer her refuge. But she doesn't need shelter. She doesn't need the metal roof and the electric heat and the fog glass of his car. She has her own roof. She has her own warmth, her own glass, and it is clear enough to see all paths ahead. Paths she had never shared, had never needed to share, had never known the need, being alone and being at peace. But then he was there, waking, stirring, disturbing, and there was a need. Here, another story, another girl, alone in the woods. Wait, no. No, not alone. She is with the dwarves. Or that girl there. She is with the roses and thorns that are cradling her castle. This girl and that girl, they are at peace. Their eyes are closed. Their guardians watching. The dwarves, the buds, the thorns. The sky is a great blanket of clouds they lay beneath. And you know this story. A man, he comes, and he misinterprets her peace as need. He wakes her. He carries her away. And does she ever see the dwarves again? Does she ever miss the budding thorn bushes? Does he ever stop to ask? She leads him away from the car and towards the copse. And there, as weightless and easy as a man falling down a deep hole, he allows himself to be led. They make it, wet and sopping, into the small shelter of the trees. And it isn't until he is under their broad leaves that block the stinging rain from his eyes that he sees the woods for what they truly are. All of the trees' bark is smooth. When he looks closely, he sees that they only have the illusion of roughness. When he brings his face nearer, he sees the illusion is cast by the trailing lines of words that spiral down from the topmost boughs all the way around the trunk to seep out of sight beneath the earth. The bark isn't bark at all. It's sanded sheets of paper, layered one on top of the other. He is just then putting his hands on the trees, the ink smudging under his palm and staining his skin, when she reaches over his head to pluck from a low-hanging bough an apple made all of glass. Look in here, at this story. A girl in a tower, content. She has a mother of a sort. She has shelter. She has sustenance. Peace. And then, outside her window, beneath the clouding sky, what comes calling, and with whom? He puts his hands under her hands as she holds the apple. Before his eyes and beyond the glass, in the core of it, he sees clouds forming. They color themselves and swirl, dizzying until they settle into shapes and become clear. There in the apple is a beautiful forest. There in the apple is a girl dressed all in red, walking down the path, breadbasket on her arm. There, in the trees ahead, something is waiting on the path. As he watches the story unfold, he stops feeling the hands of the girl against his, stops hearing the hiss of the rain beyond the grove, stops feeling the weight of his wet clothes dripping from his body. He is inside the apple. He's no longer within those trees made of paper, but standing in the shadows of new ones, solid as him, watching the girl approach and grinning. Here's an old woman, offering an apple to a girl. The girl eats it, and her eyes flutter. The girl eats it, and is gifted sleep. The girl eats it as is content and beautiful in peace. Here, there is a girl in a garden, another apple, a snake, slithering down from a limb above, another offer, another bite. Something unknown is waking up. It is stirring in the grass. Here, a mother who died, who was buried under a juniper tree. And as that tree, she tried to grant her daughter's every wish. But a tree is never enough, is it? There are always more wishes. Always wants a mother cannot satisfy. Always dangers she cannot keep at bay. When the apple has told its tale, the clouds disperse, and she sets it in the cradle of roots at the foot of a tree. She plucks him another, and they watch together, hands against hands, clouds swirling and taking shape, and the girl and the boy are pulled into the core, where they live and breathe and become the story. After he has found her opening the door she ought not, opening it to secrets she should not know, after the knife is in his hands, after her brothers finish trumpeting their battle call beyond the castle walls, they come out, and she is laughing and holding herself where there had just been a wound, but now there is nothing. A fat drop of rain manages to worm its way through the leaves, and it lands on her cheek, trails itself down to her lip, and he reaches up and wipes it away. Her laughter dies in a gasp, and there is something blossoming, a deep bruise within her unfurling. If you look here, there is a girl who can run. A girl left on the side of the mountain by a father who did not need nor want her. A girl who learned peace through speed and lived with solid needs, practical needs, needs that could be filled. She knows no need for love. She wouldn't accept it if it came calling, even if it offered up its life in return. It would have to beat her into submission, to catch her before she could flee. In comes a man, 3 apples in his arms, and a challenge to a race yet won. He'll wager his life if she wagers her love. Run they do, but the girl cannot keep her mind off of the apples, the way they shine and how they are as golden as the sun. Before she can outstrip him too much, he throws them, one after the glittering other, to land before her like comets. And she, numb-minded from need, leaves off their race to scoop them up from the ground, to hold them up to the sunlight, slanting through the drawing clouds, to see her own face reflected back at her, and behind him, him, drawing closer and closer, until he is close enough to catch her up. Love was won, yes, but was it his or the apples for claiming? After their fill of apples, and after he had touched her lips and she had gasped, there were more touches and more gasps, and each bordered sweetly between a blossom and a wound. Then came words sweet, words hesitant, words probing and curious. He laid beneath her head, her ear pressed to his chest, and he held an apple, turning it this way and that between the shafts of moonlight filtered by the leaves. But no matter how he handled it, it revealed nothing but the clouds stirring to take shape, then dissipating with each turn. And no matter what he asked, she could tell him no more about the apples than that they had always been there with her, that she had always been there with them, tending the trees, scrawling words on their surface to feed them, and harvesting their fruit, alone. But he was there now. This is a story about a young daughter whose family bartered her away to a bear. He took her away from everything she knew and gave her a new life with new rules. The most important being that she must never see who was coming to her bed at night. Of course, it was hard, being alone in the castle with only a silhouette coming to lay beside her. Of course, she had to look to see who was laying with her. Many would say that was only fair. So she did what she ought not, and lit the candle, and in seeing the shape of that which she did not know, the tallow dripped, and something woke, something beautiful and hurtful, and it was all ruined. The bear, who was sometimes a beautiful man, left, and she went through many hardships. She walked far enough to callous her feet, and rode battling winds, to come to a strange place where she was just a stranger, impoverished, only to find out that he'd already been engaged. She doesn't know much, but she knows her trees. She knows her fruit. She knows, when she wakes up the next morning and finds him gone, how many apples have gone along with him. All the ones she plucked, plus an armload more. She touches the snap springs that were torn from, and each feels like a shattered bone, a break that can never be set right. Beyond the circle of her trees, she can see the indents of his footsteps trailing back to where he left his car, unbending themselves in the grass. She sits, and she watches those stalks right themselves, and she holds an apple in her lap. In it, a story is swirling. A story it wants to tell her. A story she will not see. Instead, she waits and probes, the way one will a sore tooth, the blossoming need inside of her, and her wonder over what she had done, what rules she had broken, that he had left her like this, alone again. A girl is given to a king, who will make her his wife. There we go. If she can prove herself useful by spinning straw into gold. She never asked for this test, of course. She never wanted to be his wife. But now, it's wifedom or beheading, and she has no choice in the matter. The king will love her, but only if she can make him a profit, which she can't. She had never thought that love and profit went hand in hand, and had never thought that gold could be straw. And so, for several reasons, she had never developed this skill. She is locked in and powerless until a small, strange little imp comes and promises her deliverance. After she's delivered and the king receives her as a wife, she has a child, a sweet little baby girl who one day will be bartered off for love and for profit. But the imp comes back. He comes back to take the baby girl away from all of it. And what's so wrong with that? Why should he be so hated and so cursed for giving the child a third option? The boy does come back to her. A week later, he pulls his car off the highway and rolls it up to her copse of trees, and she goes out to meet him. He acts like nothing ever happened, like the week between the lack of farewell and his returning was nothing, like she should feel nothing at all about it. And since she doesn't want to do what she ought not, she pretends this is the case as well. The new watch on his wrist, the fine quality of his clothes, the silver lighter he flicks open to ignite the tip of a fat cigar he smokes as he waits, leaning against his car for her to come to him. These two are nothing. Nothing at all to her, among the trees made from their own corpse stuff. And so she welcomes him. They pluck apples, they become stories. They become less than they pick. They touch less, but they touch. And he lets her fall asleep on his chest, and her need is stoked and fed and restoked. And when she wakes again the next morning, and he is gone, and she has fewer apples than before, she tries very hard not to feel the soreness in her, to ignore its throb until he comes again the next week, and it all happens exactly as it happened before. All right, I am gonna cut it there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Couri. A weird fun fact is I actually taught your short story, I'll Tell You a Love Story, in my it was an intro to a writing class that I themed around the fairy tales. So
Oh my God, I'm so
yeah,
excited. Did the kids like it?
they did. Yeah, it was like I
They
had them
hardly
like
ever like
rate
anything.
Yeah, I had them rate like the top stories that we read, and it was in the top. I think it was in like the top 3 or 4 or something like that. It was really fun. So yeah, so it was just a lot of fun to like, yeah, kind of meet you and see you read it. I actually saw you read it before I taught it too. So, but anyway, so this is kind of the portion of the reading where we'd like to invite you to actually ask each other questions. And as that kind of simmers down, or I feel like maybe it would be helpful, I'll just kind of ask a question of my own as well. So let's start with kind of you, Sarah. Any questions that you have about kind of Couri or Couri's writing or different things like that, writing in general?
Absolutely. Okay. So Couri, talk to me about, how you approach interweaving, stories that have been around for centuries and making them modern. What draws you to that? What is so, I imagine, quite complicated? And then what do you find the most gratifying?
I think actually growing up in Youngstown is one of the reasons I do it, because we live in this like very weird hybrid place where it is like kind of like industrial, like Rust Belt, and kind of gritty in a lot of corners. But then we
Oh,
also have
gritty,
this
yeah.
sprawling, beautiful park, right? And when I was a kid, I used to ride around in my mom's taxi pretty constantly, reading fairy tales and reading books in general. It was like my favorite pastime. And she was a great storyteller. So she would take me through Youngstown, picking up fares, and she would often like point out houses and tell like weird ghost stories about them because she was very much a hippie pagan. And then she would take me through the park and tell me like fairy stories and things like that. So it kind of naturally like was something I grew up blending Rust Belt grit with fairy tales. It's just always an impulse I've had. I can't write realism. I tried it recently for the Jenny. I did all right-ish. Changeling still got in there, even though it was a completely nonfiction story. Because my mom used to tell me I was a changeling child, actually. I think the one thing that's really gratifying about fairy tales for me is they are like this kind of universal language where you can talk about these big traumas that are kind of personal, but in like this light touch, where everyone can kind of feel them in a disassociative kind of way. I just enjoy that.
Yeah, there's so much psychology in your response. Oh my gosh, I just have so many follow-up questions. But the one that really caught me is thinking about you know, from the viewpoint of, working with people, the fact that your mom was a taxi driver, that you were sitting, with her as she was picking up fares and things, do you feel like that influenced your approach as a writer, or your interest in the world and in people, having that early developmental exposure to all these different experiences, all these different people's lives?
I think it could have to do like, I mean, like that story, right? It's very fragmentary. We jump around to a lot of stories. And I do think there is something about like quick fragments of intimacy or something that are very near and dear to me. And that probably did come from like people jumping in and out of the car so often.
That's so interesting. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I'll stop dominating. You go ahead, Couri, if you got questions. We'll keep dialoguing.
Well, I'm interested. So it seems like you're mostly a true crime writer, correct? Or
Yeah, not true crime. It's all fiction, so it's just
well,
like people
not
behaving.
true crime, but
Exactly. Yes. It is all, it's all thrillers. It's all like, people behaving badly and people hurting each other psychologically and emotionally, physically, all that stuff. Yeah.
was
Mhm.
that something that you were drawn to because of your background in psychology?
I think so. I really think so. So human beings are really fascinating, right? That's why I became a psychologist. And like I said at the start, in my work, being a developmental psychologist, we focus so much in our training, and especially in teaching my students, about how can we create environments and relationships that support healthy growth. And that's wonderful. But I also like the darker side of humanity. And, when things go bad and you don't get early intervention. So that's what I like to explore in my writing, is because people are really complicated. And I also think, too, it's interesting to explore that every single person is more than the worst thing they've ever done. So even the characters in my books who do terrible things are not necessarily all evil or terrible or anything like that. They're very human, as we all are. And I like looking at that complexity.
Was like a love of thriller something you had when you were younger?
A love of what?
Thrillers.
Thrillers. It's funny. Okay. So growing up, I read a lot of Babysitter's Club, and I read a lot of Boxcar Children, and Ramona. That was like my early reading. And then my mom was really into Michael Crichton and like those kind of like sci-fi thrillers. And so I read those trying to be super cool like my mom. And so like kind of the thriller genre wasn't anything I really got into until I was a mom, and I was kind of looking for books to engage with. And it's funny, I really got into like the kind of mystery writing thriller genre after my father had passed away. And I was looking for books to kind of as a form of escape while you're grieving, because grief is a long process. And I fell and stumbled upon the mysteries by P.D. James, who's a famous mystery writer. And she passed away just a few years ago at the age of, I think, 92. And I loved her books because everything ended up being wrapped up in the end, and terrible things happened, but then there was a solution. And I found that very comforting in the state of my grief. And then from there, I kind of expanded from mysteries into Gillian Flynn and Fiona Barton and all these other like fabulous female writers. I don't really read a lot of male writers anymore. I've kind of discovered, and not that they aren't wonderful books out there. It's just I'm really drawn to female authors writing from a female perspective. So that's kind of what got me into it. But how about you, Couri? So tell me about your reading origins.
I mean, fairy tales were one of the big ones when I was growing up. I had like this big, like seafoam blue-green fairy tale book. I had all of the Andrew Lang books
Mhm.
as a child. I went through a lot of fantasy. Robin McKinley, who actually grew up in Warren, Ohio, I believe. She was a big one for me, and she wrote a lot of fantasy. She rewrote a lot of fairy tales. Then as I got older, it stayed a little bit the same. Angela Carter is a big influence for me. The Bloody Chamber. I think that's why I started taking like fairy tale rewrites a little bit more seriously and trying to put a feminist bent to them.
Mhm.
A lot of it is female authors for me too. Karen Russell, Kelly Link, these kind of fabulous women are people I love to read. They also tend to be a little bit darker. It's interesting. I do think that women experience and enjoy kind of dipping in the dark in a different way than men do.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't always like dark things that come from the male mind as much, but that's just me.
I find too, I remember reading, it was a dialogue or a panel of thriller writers, they were all women, and talking about this act of catharsis, how writing about these terrible fears and these terrible things happening is a way of kind of processing our own fears. Like, for example, I know in a lot of my books, there's issues between mothers and daughters. And I was writing that at a time when my daughters were preteens and teenagers, and it was a very kind of fraught time in our family. And there was just a lot of that kind of normal teenage tension. And I realized that's probably a lot of those kind of, I don't, those kind of deeply seated fears are a way you work it through your writing, even though it's highly like it's highly dramatized in the books. It's a way of kind of exploring, okay, let's imagine there's this old like anxiety treatment, which is imagine the worst thing that can happen and can you survive it, right? And if you can survive it, it ends that kind of tangled thinking of worry. And I'm like, maybe that's partly what the writing is for me, is take your terrible fears, write them out, and that kind of like releases them into the universe.
I was wondering that when you mentioned like you had just become a mom when you got into thrillers, if it was kind of like a way to box up those anxieties and put them in a way that's like more manageable. Now, how about your endings though? Do they typically have like the bow on the end of the bad thing?
Oh gosh. Okay. It really depends. I like there to be a dark twist at the end, usually. It's like, okay, things are wrapped up, but oh, hang on. Maybe someone's not quite who they think they are. Like there's this kind of implication that things might go awry right as the scene closes. And I enjoy that kind of uh that kind of darkness coming in at the end that you have to sit with as the reader. I always enjoy that in books that I read myself. I don't like happy endings. I like satisfying endings, which I think is quite different. Yeah, and so I'm thinking about if you had to choose like a kind of a typical fairy tale that really stuck, maybe had the strongest influence on you, or maybe not influence, but just is the one that you go back to and find to be your favorite? Is there one that sticks out to you?
My favorite's a little bit lesser known. It's East of the Sun and West of the Moon, which is referenced in that story I read, where it is this, it's like Cupid and Psyche myth, kind of reimagined. A girl is sold to a bear by her family, and she can't see who's laying in bed with her at night. And she looks at it, it's a beautiful man, he runs off. And she goes through all these problems, travels the world, and then she arrives in this castle town where she finds out that he's been engaged to a troll woman the whole time. Of course, it's painted as he's a victim in this. It's not his fault that he's engaged to this troll woman and was stepping out on her. But that one I loved it. It was very fun. It's an enjoyable one. Has all the patterns of threes and things like that. But the one that that one influences my work a lot. One that like Perrault, anything by Charles Perrault influences my work a lot, but it's kind of out of hate. I have issues with Perrault sometimes. He's considered the father of fairy tales, but he's the reason we're stuck with morals at the end of fairy tales. He's the one who came up with the original iteration of Little Red Riding Hood as we have it now. But in that version, she dies and nobody comes to save her. And then at the end, it says he's like, moral of the story is like, little girls, you have to watch out because you're gonna, you shouldn't talk to strangers, basically. And if you talk to strangers, you're gonna get ate up and it's your fault. Another one by him is Bluebeard, where a man marries a woman and it turns out he's been murdering his wives. And she's not supposed to open this door. He leaves her alone. She opens the door. He finds out, and then he goes the murderer. And the moral of the story is like, women shouldn't be curious. Curious is gonna get killed.
Which is a long-standing trope, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dora. Oh.
You could tell he was getting called out for being misogynist even in his time, which was like, I think 1700s in France. Because he added another moral. It's like, obviously you can tell I'm joking and that this kind of barbarism would never happen. And so it's a joke, guys. It's like, yeah, sure, Perot. You protest a little bit too much. Your morals are always a little too mean to women. But yeah, I am searching for a question. Cassandra, do you have any?
I do, yeah. And I was just thinking too how like Carter tends to like shift Perot's stuff too, like in the Bloody Chamber and in the
She
so
loves Perot. It's the
yeah.
one thing we disagree. Well, she also loves Marquis de Sade, so
Mhm.
I don't know if Angela Carter's always got the best taste in men, but neither I mean same girl, same.
Yeah. It's always interesting to see her take on Bluebeard and things like that as well. But one question that came to mind, especially as you were talking about like the reading journey, is I'm curious about like how your writing has changed over the years and over different publications. Kind of thinking early publications versus what you're doing now. How would you how do you say that your writing has changed the most? We'll start with Sarah if you want.
Well, I definitely put more fire in it, as I've already noted. That's a joke, but it's also true. And that's just how my life has evolved, I suppose. I think for me, not having any sort of, aside from my minor in English, I'm a trained psychologist. I got back into writing after my children were a little bit older. And, there was an issue, I think, of can I actually do this? Can I actually write a novel? And I think in my earlier work, it's very much kind of, it's a little less fearless than my newer material. My newer material, and this is something that I found just, I'll be 43 this year. And as I've gotten older, I find in my teaching, in my writing, and in my life, I feel much more comfortable being authentic in my portrayal of myself. And so I find myself not having to, I guess, kind of create these filters for how I want to present myself as an author or as an educator or as a woman. And as a result, my writing feels very honest in the way that I'm portraying my perceptions of humanity. And I hope, it's not just authentic, but also entertaining too. It's meant to be entertaining. So I think that confidence has come with experience, but also just with DGAF, man. I'm just kind of going for it and being true to who I am and recognizing that it may not be everyone's preference, but that's okay. Because for the ones who do connect with it, it's going to be a very, hopefully, an enduring one.
Yeah, thank you. And how about for you, Couri?
Um, thematically, I haven't changed much at all. I think like it was Ernest Sabato once said there's a certain kind of like author that's always telling just the one same story over and over again. And that's me, just with a different metaphor every time. Uh, Sometimes I put in way more semicolons than I used to. Actually, I'm cutting back on that now because I realize I might not know what a semicolon does, which is a shame. I'm a copywriter for a living, so don't tell my boss that.
Oh, Cory, I
Um,
do the same with M dashes. M dashes
I love M
everywhere.
dashes.
I
Oh my
love
God,
it.
I use M dashes everywhere and semicolons everywhere. Well, that's something that's like people have said that and in the past I think I tried to conform a little bit more to certain kinds of voices. During my time in the MFA, I had a lot of men who were noir fans, and they would always tell me I had to be noir. I had a lot of minimalists in my life who would tell me I need to be more minimalist in my like words. And then I leaned, well, that's kind of a masculine critique. It was all very masculine critiques. I leaned into a very feminine linguistic style in my work, especially as I moved into the PhD and I studied like gender theory a little bit more. So I just started going wild with M dashes and semicolons and sentences that could be a whole paragraph in length and paragraphs that could be a whole page in length. But now as I do these readings, I realize that's actually not great for reading off the page out loud. So I'm gonna have to do a stage version where I cut down on some of those grammatical nuances or complications rather.
Just add more semicolons. That's all you
More
need. More
semicolons.
semicolons, and that's your pot.
Semicolon after every word.
All the dramatic pauses. Yeah, thank you both so much. I think that kind of wraps up kind of the question part of things. Karen, did you have any notes or follow-ups?
Well, I just want to thank you both so much for such an engaging and enjoyable reading, for such thoughtful questions and interaction. Youngstown is so proud of you, and we wish you all the best with your writing, and look forward to working with you again. It's so great to see you too, Cassandra, who was worked with very closely with Lit Youngstown for several years and left a Cassandra-sized hole when she moved to Wisconsin. So this has been a great reunion for me as well. Many thanks too to Ashley for keeping everything humming behind the scenes. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and just right on.
Thank you so much for having us. It's such a pleasure, everybody. And I would not be where I am without Youngstown State and the education it gave me. So thank you to YSU.
Thank you, Karen. It's always great to see you. Great to see what Lit Youngstown's doing. It's so nice to meet you, Sarah and Cassandra.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
All right, good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.